I once read a book about Macbeth that began with the line, "Macbeth's downfall is his inability to read." I'm going to start this video essay with a similarly provocative line. Macbeth's downfall is his inability to fit neatly into the categories that the world demands of him. It's not as short and as punchy as his inability to read, but I think it works. And it's not just Macbeth. The world of this play has strict hierarchies and social roles, and these titles and categories place restrictions on all the characters, and their failure to fit neatly within them provokes the tragedy. One of the earliest and most memorable lines in this play is when the witches claim that fair is foul and foul is fair, joining two binary opposites together and dissolving whatever boundaries appear between those two descriptions. It is a play, from the very start, about the insufficiency of language and the insufficiency of identity categories to actually explain the complexities of the human experience. So my Act 1 hot take is this. Macbeth isn't responsible for his own downfall. The restrictive and coercive social structures that surround him are responsible. The rigid categories that he's forced to live within fail him. Specifically, today we're going to focus on the category of masculinity, but the logic could be extended to any other social category and other acts throughout the play. Just as the witches dissolved the boundary between foul and fair, the same will happen with the boundary between masculinity and femininity. The characters in this play will blur the lines between those categories by unsexing themselves and unmanning each other. But they also, at the same time, depend on the stability of those categories, hoping that their stability will result in a peaceful political system. Macbeth feels the pressure to be the most masculine man, to fill the role of the brave soldier and protector or father of Scotland. He believes masculinity to be a stable category, and if he could just be man enough, maybe Scotland can be stable too. It isn't. He won't, and if Scotland is stable at the end, it's not because masculinity saves it. So that's our focus today. And if that sounds like fun to you, please consider subscribing. And with that out of the way, let's take Act 1 of Macbeth play by play. The first category to be disrupted in Macbeth is the category of beginnings. Macbeth the play begins with an ending. Some witches are concluding their meeting and wondering when they're going to meet up again. So the beginning of this play is an ending, and I wonder if that's going to change the way that we view the ending. And the answer to their opening question of when shall we three meet again is when the battle's lost and won. There are no clearly defined categories. Winning and losing blur together from the witch's perspective. They don't have a side, just as they don't clearly have a gender. When Banquo encounters them in the third scene, he says, "You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so." Humans search for clearly defined categories, beginnings and endings, winners and losers, masculine and feminine. But the witches seem to exist outside the language that we use to divide the world. And once those witches leave the stage, we get our first introduction to the political world of Scotland. And it's filled with instability. What bloody man is that? Well, he's a sergeant, a brave soldier, a friend, and he has knowledge of the battles that seem to be happening everywhere. It's a chaotic scene, but the bloody man will bring order to it with his report. What we learn is that Scotland faces threats from within and without. MacDonald, a Scotsman, is a traitor, and the Norwegians are also invading. Luckily, Scotland is protected, not so much by their king, Duncan, but by a skilled soldier named Macbeth. Duncan will never lead any army into battle, and that's extremely rare for a king in a Shakespeare play. We don't get much characterization of Duncan right away, that will come a little bit later, but it's notable that he's dependent on others to protect him and his kingdom. To put this another way, the leader of the kingdom does not really appear to be leading. He does a lot more listening than directing. He doesn't quite fit the expectation of his title. We may not get a good description of Duncan here, but we do, however, get a great opening characterization of Macbeth before we meet the man himself. The bloody captain describes the battle by saying that the two armies appeared as two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their arts. Two tired swimmers, clinging to each other, dependent on each other, but also trying to overcome each other. The visual image itself blurs the distinctions between the armies. A mess of tangled limbs. They cling together like they're hugging, but in doing so, they drown each other. Or they're trying to drown each other, and by doing so, they end up hugging. The bloody captain says that MacDonald had fortune on his side, who he calls rebel's whore. But Macbeth acted like Valor's minion who disdained fortune. MacDonald, in other words, is aligned with the feminine character of Fortune, and Macbeth with the masculine character of Valor. And Macbeth ultimately unseams him from knave to the chops. Great line. He defeats both MacDonald and fate with that line. But it's not enough to win the day. When the captain has to leave, the character Ross keeps that story going. He tells Duncan that Norway appeared aided by the Thane of Cawdor, and Macbeth had to keep fighting. And to conclude, he says, "The victory fell on us, Scotland and Macbeth." What a hero Macbeth is. What a man. And notably, from their perspective, the war is not lost or won, it's just won. From their position, this is an unqualified victory. But there is something that is lost and won here. Interestingly, Duncan's response to the story is to call for Cawdor's death and to give Macbeth his title. So Macbeth will become the Thane of Cawdor. What Cawdor hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won. The title of Cawdor is stable. It, along with the hierarchy that it performs, continues even if the body that the title refers to changes. So Macbeth has a new title, a new name. He's been baptized in blood, and in some ways, through his own brave actions, he's given birth to a new version of himself. By killing Cawdor, he became Cawdor, a single act of new self-definition. Which brings us to scene 3, where the witches meet again and they continue to disrupt categories of identity. They make some dirty jokes about a sailor's wife unwilling to share chestnuts, therefore upsetting marital and domestic expectations. Then they fart a bit, and eventually Macbeth shows up. And Macbeth's very first line in the entire play is "So foul and fair a day I have not seen," mirroring the witch's language from the first scene of the play. That line should hit hard and force us to ask a bunch of questions. Did the witches predict that he'd say that? What sort of influence do they have over him? Remember, in scene 2, we heard about Macbeth earning himself a reward through his own actions. But here, we see how he might not be fully in control of his own destiny. In scene 2, we learn that he disdained the feminine figure of Fortune. He created his own identity through autonomous action. But in scene 3, it seems like there are larger forces at work. Forces that can't be easily sorted or understood through the categories of free will and fate, freedom and control. Macbeth seems to say words that have been given to him, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." And the words themselves blur the margins between opposing definitions. Shakespeare sometimes is just so good. The witches proceed to give Macbeth and Banquo a prophecy. Macbeth will be called Cawdor and eventually king, and Banquo's children will become kings, but he will not be king himself. The witches then vanish, and Banquo says that the earth bubbles as though it's water, which begs the question, is it earth? Is it water? Nothing seems to have a stable identity here. Once the weird sisters vanish, Ross shows up and greets Macbeth with his new title, which obviously freaks him out because it confirms the first part of the witch's prophecy. Macbeth's actual response is, "Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" And you could write a great essay about the imagery of garments in this play. People have. Carolyn Spurgeon has a great essay called Shakespeare's Imagery and What It Tells Us on this exact topic. And what it tells us is that the clothes don't fit, just like the title Thane of Cawdor doesn't fit, because these titles that define and produce social hierarchies don't fit our human experience. A man doesn't become more important than other men just because he puts on a fancier shirt or because he's called by a new title. Anyway, Banquo continues the imagery by saying that new honors come upon him like our strange garments, clear not to their mold, but with the aid of use. The new title and new positions feel like borrowed or strange garments that will only fit by using them. He's saying to Macbeth that he has to perform the new self in order to be the new self. Identity is something that one does or wears rather than something stable. Remember that for later. In the following scene, we learn that Duncan had built an absolute trust in the former Thane of Cawdor. and so it seems that Duncan might not be the best judge of character. He might be too trusting. There has been a bunch of scholarly attention given to the idea that Duncan is a sort of androgynous king. He loves and trusts rather than leads and fights. In scene 4, for example, he tells Macbeth and Banquo that he has begun to plant thee and will labor to make thee full growing. He intends to mother them, to nurture them. Duncan needs to be protected by men like Macbeth, while he takes pride in being somebody who nurtures the people in his kingdom rather than fighting for them or with them. People have argued that he's more maternal than paternal. In the scene, Duncan also announces that his son, Malcolm, will succeed him as king. He says that Malcolm has signs of nobleness like stars that shall shine on all deservers. And this concerns Macbeth because that means that there's another obstacle in his way to becoming king and fulfilling the rest of that prophecy. So, in an aside to the audience, he flips that star imagery around and says, "Stars hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires." He needs the darkness to hide his thoughts of killing Duncan and his son, which he will have the opportunity to do when Duncan stays in his house. Scene 5 opens with Lady Macbeth reading a letter from Macbeth. This is the first time that we meet or hear anything about Lady Macbeth, and what we learn is that nobody values manliness more than her, which makes sense. She is married to the manliest man. Macbeth is a soldier who unmans other soldiers. And yet, he's not quite man enough for Lady Macbeth. She fears that Macbeth is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way to the throne and fulfill the prophecy. So she calls on spirits to unsex her, to remove those qualities she associates with femininity and replace them with direst cruelty. She's intense, she's a rationalist, she's manipulative, and yet, oddly, I think we might also say that this is a pretty supportive partnership. He tells her about this strange vision that he has, and she sees through it to see that Macbeth wants something, and she's going to help him get it. So is this a healthy and supportive relationship? I don't know. I don't want to put labels on it. That's like the entire point of this video essay. The Macbeth marriage cannot be categorized using a traditional rubric. Lady Macbeth commits herself to the murder plot completely. But Act 1, Scene 7 begins with an extraordinary Macbeth soliloquy where he deeply questions what they have to do. So let's give that speech some close attention. The soliloquy opens with the line, "If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly." We know he's talking about murdering Duncan, but his meaning is obscured by his use of the word it. If Macbeth becomes king when the murder is done, then it were well that the murder is done quickly. He can't face the action directly. He can't say it outright. We have to fill in the gaps. When he does name it, after 13 monosyllabic words in that first sentence, we get the first use of the word assassination in the history of the written English language. Assassination is a word borrowed from Arabic, and it sounds foreign within the context of this speech. Macbeth is keeping his actions at a distance through his language. He can't call it a murder or treason. He has to call it or the deed, or find some new and foreign-sounding word like assassination. And the language only gets more difficult to read from there. If the assassination could trammel up the consequences and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be-all and end-all here, but here, upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. Woo! I know I did a great job reading that, but did you see how hard that line is to say? It's a tongue twister. Surcease success? What sort of madman puts those words together? Surcease, by the way, just means cessation or ending, so for Macbeth, with Duncan's ending, he'll have success. But that's not how Macbeth phrases it, his surcease success. This is a mind confused, and the language reflects that confusion. You may have also noted how many times Macbeth says the word but in this speech. The conjunction but signals a rhetorical shift, a changing mind. Macbeth is linguistically going back and forth. His language is as confused about what to do as he is. The speech itself refuses any fixed meaning. I've heard it argued that no one, including Macbeth, would be able to understand what he's actually saying here. Every point he makes is undermined by another point. Ultimately, he's debating between two different definitions of masculinity. One definition centers action. A man does difficult and courageous things, as Macbeth has done on the battlefield. The other definition centers virtue. A man is strong enough to rise above his own selfish desires and protect his community. Under the first definition, he should kill the maternal King Duncan, who is not strong enough to be courageous. Under the second definition, he should rise above his personal ambition and protect Duncan, who is a guest in his house. The category of masculinity itself is confused. Foul is fair and fair is foul. Toward the end of the speech, Macbeth seems to be leaning in the direction of hospitality over treason. As he says, Duncan stays in his house in double trust, and Macbeth should protect him rather than murder him. He should just go to sleep and not kill anyone tonight. Which is interesting, because Macbeth has often been praised for his ability to kill. He's encouraged to kill. Killing is what this world expects of him. Duncan expects Macbeth to continue killing people as a soldier, but here he seems to decide not to kill. He has no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition. His only reason to commit this murder is selfish, based on his own ambition. And that's not a good enough reason. Just because he has been successful at killing people in the past doesn't mean that he has to keep killing in the future. It doesn't mean that his identity is killer, right? Well, the world kind of expects that from him. Specifically, the witches and Lady Macbeth expect Macbeth to keep killing people, specifically Duncan. So the act of killing is also a confused category. Sometimes it's bravery, and sometimes it's cowardice. Sometimes it's valor, and sometimes it's treason. For this reason, Macbeth is confused about who the objects of his killing should be. When he kills on the battlefield, it's not considered murder, but the logic of the battlefield may not apply to the domestic space of the home. The definition of murder is fluid. It applies in some contexts, but not others. What made him a man out on the battlefield may not make him a man at home. But of course, that's not the way that Lady Macbeth sees it. She makes the murder of Duncan a test of his manliness, and she doesn't hide it in any fancy language. When you durst do it, then you were a man. She then builds on her earlier unsex me speech by saying that she has given suck and know how tender 'tis love the babe that milks me, but that she is so resolute that she would dash out that baby's brains if she'd sworn to do it. Lady Macbeth doesn't mess around. Also, did these two lovebirds have kids? This is literally the only mention of a possible child between them, and it's actually pretty important to the plot that Macbeth doesn't have kids while Banquo does. So I guess we need to ask that famous question, how many children had Lady Macbeth? We don't actually need to answer that question. The point, I think, is to stress Lady Macbeth's control over Macbeth. He has to become a man on her terms, or he'll end up becoming a vulnerable child. Paradoxically, Macbeth is dependent on a woman to define masculinity for him, and masculinity is defined for him as an action. It is something that he must do and perform rather than something he is. He will be a man once he's done the deed. So maybe this play will ultimately be a tragedy because Macbeth actually becomes the man that this world tells him that he needs to be, or maybe it's a tragedy because he's never actually able to achieve it because it's something that is unachievable. I'm not sure. This play certainly sets us up to question the nature of identity and the ability for language to parse the world into easily understood categories, and the pressure that we feel to fit into or maintain those categories through repeated performance. These ideas are further developed as the play goes on, but in the next video we're going to focus on the play's use of time. It's a fast play, and Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are constantly leaping over the present moment to rush toward some fantastic future. So subscribe to be notified when that next video comes out, and thank you for watching.